You know what I found out that was very interesting to me this past week was that there are 5 centurions that we are introduced to in the gospel accounts of Jesus' life here upon this earth. There was the centurion whose faith amazed Jesus. You remember Jesus was coming into the coast close to Capernaum, and this centurion came to him and his servant. Another account says his son, perhaps 2 different centurions, but nonetheless, he came to Jesus and said, "My servant is ill to the point of death." And Jesus said, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion said, "No, I am not worthy to even have you come under my roof. But I too am a man under authority, and I say to this man, come, and he comes, and I tell this man, go, and he goes. And so, Lord, I know that you don't need to come to my house, that all you have to do is say the word, and my servant will be healed." We're told that this man's faith amazed Jesus. So much so that Jesus would declare that I have not found such great faith in all of Israel. This Gentile was demonstrating tremendous faith in Jesus and his ability to heal, even from a distance. We're introduced in Acts chapter 10 to Cornelius, the first Gentile, and he and his household, first Gentiles to receive the gospel unto salvation, that he was praying unto God, that he was a holy man, he was a righteous man, he was a devout man, he prayed to God often, he gave much alms to the people, and he was a wonderful man, but he was not saved. And the thing about it is that it tells us that God hears even the prayers of sinners if their prayers are such that they are seeking to find the truth, that they may know the truth, that they might be able to obey the truth. That was the case with Cornelius and his household. Peter saw a vision that instructed him to go with the men that were approaching without asking any questions, and he was to go and he was to declare to Cornelius and his household the words of eternal life. There was the centurion Claudius Lysias, who rescued Paul from the Jerusalem mob. You remember Paul went to Jerusalem. There were some Gentiles there, and Paul was falsely accused of profaning the temple because they accused him of taking these Gentiles into the inner court, which was not legal for Gentiles. It was a false claim, but because of that, there was a Jewish mob that just formed, and they were beating up on Paul. And this centurion took his men down and got Paul out of their hands, and it was later he that sent letters with Paul over to Caesarea because he found out about a plot that was being brought into fruition to kill Paul. And that's another one of the centurions that we are introduced to. There is Julius, a centurion who was on the ship with Paul. You remember it was necessary for Paul to appeal to Caesar. And so he was on a ship on his way to Rome. And we read about this centurion named Julius that was making the journey with Paul. And then there's the centurion that we just read about and Mario introduced us to in Mark chapter 15, the centurion that was present when Christ was being crucified. As I looked at all this, I thought it might be an interesting study to look at these centurions and see how their lives were affected by Jesus and how things were going in their lives and whatever. But tonight, what I would like to do concerning this particular centurion is to look at what he saw as he stood there as Jesus was crucified in this account. The first thing that we want to notice is that he saw the hatred of these Jewish leaders. We know, we've talked about it many times, that Jesus was hated by the Jewish leaders because the common people, we're told, heard Jesus gladly. There was a great multitude of people that were following Jesus. They were becoming very jealous of Jesus because he was taking away the throng of the people that they were used to of speaking to and influencing. Actually, they were used to them telling the people how that they were to live their lives, laying heavy burdens of oral traditions upon them. And here came Jesus preaching the people about the God of heaven and about the true will of God. And they hated him for that. And they delivered him up. Pilate rather, in Matthew 27, verses 15 through 18, it says that Pilate recognized that the people had delivered Jesus up because they were envious of him and that they wanted Pilate to do their dirty work for them. This picture here of this chief priest being in the face of Jesus, if you saw the movie The Passion of the Christ, you will recognize that. And I don't know who that actor is, and I don't know who did the makeup and all that kind of stuff. But as you look at the expression of this guy here, you can just kind of see in his face the hatred, the anger, and all the angst that he was feeling in regard to this man Jesus, who was so popular among the people. We're told that those men, the high priest and the chief priest and all the various leaders of the Jews, they loved the praises of men. But they were losing the praises of men because they were paying more attention to Jesus. And the common people heard him gladly. And so then we read concerning this in Mark chapter 15, those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ha, you who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes, were mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe." There's great significance to that last statement that they said. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe. Well, they had seen all kinds of miracles that Jesus had performed. As a matter of fact, we read how that after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, that they could not deny the most notable miracle that Jesus had performed. And so they were determining and they were kind of plotting how that they might just kill Lazarus again, put him to death, because he bore testimony to the power of Jesus. Many, many years ago, there was a newspaper article that appeared in one of the major city newspapers, and it was written by a religious columnist, and he was kind of talking about how things would be if Jesus returned to earth at this time, during this day and age. And he was talking about how that Jesus would perform all kinds of miracles and the people would be filled with awe and wonder, how that he was walking about talking and preaching with the people, and how that there were multitudes of people that were following him, and how that all of these people would follow Jesus and accept his teaching and accept the miracles as evidence of him being the Son of God, and they would become believers and be converted to Jesus Christ. I don't think that that would happen. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that that wouldn't happen if Jesus appeared on earth today. I don't think he'd be received any better than he was when he came the first time, because the world hasn't changed. Because Satan is still the god of this world. Satan is the one that controls the life of the multitudes of people here upon this earth. And I don't think that Jesus would be any more popular today than he was when he came in the first century. But one of the things that I am kind of interested in thinking about is, how would we receive him? What kind of reaction to Jesus would we today, as God's children, have for Jesus? That's one of the reasons why this morning I emphasize that this coming revival meeting that we're about to have, starting next week, just 1 week from today, how important it is for our attitude to be one of excitement, but one of looking forward to hearing what Brother Ryan has to say, looking forward to being together to worship God and to remember Jesus. The meeting is largely about Jesus and the effect that he needs to be having in our lives today. One of the things that this Roman centurion, according to the law, Joseph and Mary, was to take him to the temple and present him to the Lord because he was the firstborn male. But there was this guy named Simeon there at the temple, and it says that Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, "Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rise of many in Israel, and for a sign to be opposed, and a sword will pierce even your own soul," he was saying to Mary. In other words, what Simeon was telling her was that she was going to see things concerning her son Jesus that was just going to break her heart. It was going to cause her to shed much tears. And we read several times how that Mary would take these things that she heard and she would put them into her heart and she would think about these things. So can you imagine all during those 3 to 3.5 years that Jesus was going about preaching, the things that she was thinking about, maybe the things that she had heard her own son Jesus say as he spoke to the multitude. Maybe she even heard or was told by some of the apostles how that Jesus had been telling them, even though they didn't understand it, but he was telling them that he was going to experience a horrible, horrible death, like death on the cross. And so we think about how that in John chapter 19 and verse 25, we're told how that by standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary and the wife of Clopas and Mary Magdalene. You know, a number of years ago, when Meredith was not quite 2 years old, my family went over to Maryland to visit my brother. And there was Amber and Meredith, our 2 daughters, Mary Jo's daughter, Zenobia, and my brother's daughter, Nicole. And they were all pretty much close in age. And they were all just running around out in his backyard. He had a big, huge backyard. And Meredith stumbled and fell into the corner of the concrete steps of the back porch of his house and just busted the corner of her lip up something terrible. I mean, it just looked horrible. And we're way out in the country, and this was on the weekend, and there was no doctor to take her to and whatever. When we went to worship in Glen Burnie, and I want to tell you, if you've ever gone over to Maryland and came anywhere close to Baltimore or Washington, D.C., every road sign that you see says an exit for Glen Burnie. I don't know where Glen Burnie was. I mean, we went there to worship that Sunday morning. And fortunately, there were some people there who were raised in Texas, and they called their pediatrician, and he saw Meredith that Sunday afternoon. And he said, well, there's really not much I can do for her because some of the tissue has already started healing. And basically about the only thing that you can do is take her to a plastic surgeon, and he might be able to kind of fix that to where it's not going to be such a big bulging. Well, it's not all that bad, but I want to tell you, the picture that we took of Meredith and the incredible bruise that she had all around her mouth like that, I can't look at that picture. I really just can't look at that picture because I remember how much my little daughter was hurt in that accident. But can you imagine Mary, the mother of Jesus, having seen her son who had been scourged and how that his flesh was torn from him to where even there was bone tissue showing? Can you imagine how she might have felt seeing the crown of thorns upon his head? How that she stood there and heard the hammer hitting the head of the nails that were driven through his flesh? How that she watched him as the cross was lifted up and dropped down into its place, and how that must have looked at as far as his body being suspended there. I cannot imagine the horror of that. And especially since I'm not a woman and I'm not a mother, I'm confident that she had a greater response to that than perhaps even a man would have. How horrible that was for her to watch and see her son treated like that. The Roman soldier saw Mary, and he saw her reaction, the tears that were flowing from her eyes because of the treatment of her son. He also saw the agony of Jesus. She heard Jesus at the 9th hour cry out with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? He saw this man whose body was just literally ripped to shreds. And he saw how this man conducted himself. I'm sure that he didn't understand what was going on when darkness came over the earth and the earthquake took place and all the physical things that he saw as God showed his wrath towards sin as he poured out his judgment upon Jesus for the sin of the world. I'm sure that he didn't understand what that was all about. But I'm also confident that he could see just how agonizing it was for Jesus. Not just the physical pain, but clearly there was an emotional distress that Jesus was under because his Father had turned from him for the first time ever. Jesus didn't know what not being in favor with the Father was about, but he was made sin who knew no sin. According to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 21, it was necessary for the Father to turn away, having no countenance for sin, as he was pouring out the judgment for the sin of the world. And he saw how that affected Jesus and how traumatic it was for Jesus, not just the cruelty of it, but the emotional trauma that he had to deal with because he was taking on the sin of the world and paying the penalty price for the sin of the world and the judgment of the Father for the sin of the world, so that you and I don't have to experience that. What an incredible blessing it is, brethren, for us to know that we will not have to deal with the wrath of God. Romans chapter 5 and Romans chapter 6 point out very vividly how that Jesus reconciled us unto God, made peace between us as sinners and a perfectly holy God, and how that he was able to pay the price so that we would never have to give an account for the sins that we have committed. But through our obedience to Jesus Christ and putting him on in baptism, then we have the freedom from all the various assets as far as what it's all about to be a sinner. This centurion saw Jesus and the agony that he suffered there on the cross. And then finally he heard Jesus, even from the cross, concerning these people that we read about a while ago, how that they were mocking him. They spat on him, the scriptures say. Jesus even told his apostles that they were going to spit on him before it ever even happened. He told them how he would be mocked and how that he would be mistreated. And this centurion, as he was there at the cross, heard Jesus cry from the cross, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing." Those words of Jesus, and seeing how that he wasn't on the cross begging for mercy, begging for his life, but how that he was actually in control of the situation because he was doing the Father's will. But he heard that plaintive cry from Jesus, "Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." He'd never heard anybody have that kind of compassion for people who were mistreating him, who hated him so much that they were abusing him in every way that they could think of. And therefore, it's the reason why that the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." It's interesting, fascinating to me, that this centurion, this Gentile, very likely never heard Jesus preach a single thing. He might not have ever seen Jesus perform a miracle. We don't really know for sure. But he was a Gentile. He certainly wasn't familiar necessarily with the history of the Jews. He certainly wasn't aware of the prophetic scriptures concerning Jesus, especially Isaiah 53, what would be happening and fulfilled there at the cross as Jesus hung there. But what he did know was he had seen this man who was crucified. Perhaps he had seen hundreds, maybe thousands of men crucified, but he had never seen a man like this. He never saw a man who accepted all of that punishment of which he was not guilty of any crime that weren't warranted being put to death, especially on the cross. But he saw this man, Jesus, and how he died and how he called for the forgiveness of those who were crucifying him. And he was convinced He was convinced by the evidence of that which he saw that Jesus was and had to be the very Son of God. We're told that Jesus would humble himself and become obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 8. He did that for you and me. He did that for all who need to have the forgiveness of their sins. And he did that so that we can live with absolute confidence that when life here upon this earth is over, there's a joyous reunion with our Father and all those who have been saved in heaven above. And God is just waiting there to welcome us because Jesus went to the cross as the Son of God and paid the penalty price for our sin. As I look over the audience, perhaps there's none here that need to obey the gospel. Maybe there is. I just want everyone to think about the fact that this man, this Gentile man, looked and saw what happened at the cross. And it was enough to convince him to make that statement, surely this was the Son of God. If we all truly believe that Jesus is the Son of God, as Jesus said, if you love me, then keep my commandments. Help us to do that. We pray to God that he will help us to do that. Help us all to be determined to walk as faithfully with God as we possibly can. Maybe there's someone here that needs some help. Maybe there's someone here who is struggling with your faith. Maybe there's someone here whose faith is starting to wane some because of what's been happening in our lives. Are you coming to Jesus tonight? It's a good question for all of us to consider. Maybe you don't need to come and seek the help of your brothers and sisters in Christ. Maybe it's just a matter, as we sing this song, to be reminded of how much we need to every day commit ourselves to being a faithful follower of Christ. But if we can assist you this evening, won't you come and let Jesus help you while together we stand and sing this song? The voice of the Jesus.